Hi everybody. This is one in the series of short introductory lectures on basic plant function and morphology that lay a foundation for the rest of the semester. The goal of this lecture is to give you an insight into the importance in propagation and production of paying as much attention to a plant's root system as you do to the above-ground plant parts. By the end of this unit, you'll be able to list the main functions of plant roots, describe the differences between taproot and fibrous root systems, and understand the difference between seminal and adventitious roots. Let's start by looking at the main functions of roots. Roots anchor a plant in the ground or substrate. They're also responsible for taking up water and nutrients from the soil or substrate and directing them up to the shoots through the plant's vascular system. In some plants, specialized roots also act as storage organs for carbohydrates, and this is an adaptation which helps a plant survive periods of environmental stress, such as prolonged drought or cold. Specialized storage organs can sometimes be used in propagation, and we'll discuss this in a later module on propagating from specialized storage organs. When we're growing plants from seed, the first structure to emerge through the seed coat during the germination process is usually the radicle. The radicle is a young embryonic root, and we'll discuss this in more detail in the later module on propagating plants from seed. In the diagram on the right, you can see the radicle of a young oak tree emerging from its seed. Once the radicle has broken through the seed coat, it starts to develop into one of two main types of root systems, either a fibrous root system or a system dominated by a taproot. The type of root system a plant develops is controlled by its genetics. The roots on plants grown from seed are sometimes referred to as seminal roots, and the word seminal comes from the Latin for the word to sow, just like the Spanish words sembrar or semilla. The part of the plant where the stem and the roots meet or interface is called the crown, and you can see this in these two diagrams on the right, here and here. So let's take a look now at fibrous root systems. In some plants, the newly emerged radicle quickly produces secondary and tertiary roots, which develop into a fibrous root system. In a fibrous root system, the roots may be different sizes, but no single root dominates in either diameter or length. From a practical point of view, plants with deep, extensive fibrous root systems can be really good for controlling soil erosion. A good example is purple needlegrass, Stipa pulchra, which is a California native grass and actually California's state grass. It has a fibrous root system that can grow over 20 feet deep, which is not only good for soil erosion, but enables purple needlegrass to be extremely drought tolerant. In other plants, the radicle continues to grow both in length and diameter and becomes the dominant root in the root system. This type of root is called a taproot. Thinner secondary and tertiary roots develop laterally from the taproot. And a really common plant with a taproot that you're probably all familiar with is the dandelion, which you can see in the diagram here. Our California native oaks are good examples of plants that can form very deep taproots. The photo here shows a seedling of coast live oak, Quercus agrifolia. This isn't a great photo, there's a lot of shade in it, but you can see the young taproot with secondary roots developing. In the wild, the taproot of some of our native oaks, such as blue oak, Quercus douglasii, can grow as deep as 70 feet in order to tap into water reserves that are held really, really deep in the soil profile. As mentioned earlier, some plants have modified storage roots that act as a reserve of carbohydrates to enable plants to survive periods of environmental stress. Some of these modified roots are edible, and plant breeders have developed selected forms where the taproot is very much enlarged. Examples include radish, carrots, beets, and parsnips, plus other vegetables such as turnip, rutabaga, and sugar beet. Roots in both fibrous and taproot systems develop root hairs. These are tiny hair-like structures produced in the root's zone of differentiation. They're not produced along the entire length of a root. Root hairs increase the surface area of the root system and help with the uptake of water and nutrients from the soil or substrate. The length and number of root hairs is determined by a plant's genetics. And root hairs are ephemeral. They only last for a few days. Root hairs are particularly important for the uptake of nutrients such as phosphate that only move very slowly through the soil. In some plants, the function of root hairs is supplemented by symbiotic relationships with mycorrhizal fungi in the soil, which help to extend the volume of soil that plant roots are able to exploit. In propagation and nursery production, it's important to remember that root hairs are very fragile and can be easily damaged during the transplanting process. Most folks think of plant roots as being white or creamy white, and young roots usually are because they contain no pigments. But as roots develop, they can become pigmented, and it's not uncommon to see healthy roots that are white, creamy white, black, dark brown, purplish, pinkish, or yellow. Some stinging nettles have yellow roots, as do many shrubs in the genus Berberis, such as our California native Berberis pinnata that you can see in the photo here. You need to be aware that diseased or dying roots can often be brown or black, so it's really important for a grower to be able to tell the difference between healthy pigmented roots and diseased ones. Root development and the resulting architecture or structure of the root system are determined by a plant's genes. They can also be influenced, though, by the growing environment and by production practices in the nursery, both for the better and for the worse. In the ground or in containers, root structure can be modified by the soil or substrate physical properties, by the presence of a hard pan if you're growing in the ground, by nutrient and water availability, by soil or substrate temperature, and by pests and pathogens. In containerized plant production, root structure can also be influenced by the shape, size, and type of container, and the length of time that we leave a plant in a particular container. In the photo here, you can see a good example of a pretty poor quality root system. This photo shows part of the root system of an Australian tea tree that was left in a small 2.5-inch square container for way too long. The roots have wrapped around the inside of the container and they'll never grow out of this shape. The result of this in shrubs and trees is a plant whose root function is impaired. The plant will usually be less stable in the ground and won't be able to take up water and nutrients as efficiently. This is really important in a region like California, where water resources are scarce and we need our landscape plants to be as water-wise as possible. In the nursery, we can also modify the root structure with root pruning techniques. This might be done manually when a plant is being potted up to a larger container, and this practice of root pruning is particularly important for the production of trees with good quality root systems. As an alternative to manual root pruning techniques, nursery containers that promote air pruning can also be used to encourage early development of a well-branched root system that will produce a quality plant. The photo here shows a young pawpaw seedling, which is a tree that produces edible fruit. You can see the main taproot here, which was air pruned when it reached the large drainage hole in the bottom of the plug tray it was growing in. Roots can't grow into air, so the tip of the taproot died, and this encouraged the growth of the lateral, primary, and secondary roots that you can see in the photo. The result of this down the road will be a tree with a well-branched, well-developed fibrous root system. You learned earlier that the roots growing from the crown of plants grown from seed are referred to as seminal roots. Let's talk now about a different type of root called adventitious roots. Adventitious roots are defined as roots that are produced anywhere on the plant other than from the original crown. The original crown is only present when plants are grown from seed, so the roots on plants propagated from vegetative plant parts such as stems and leaves will always be adventitious roots. In the photo on the right, you can see young Arbequina olive plants. These have been grown from stem cuttings, so the roots that you can see growing through the bottom of the plugs are adventitious. Some plants produce adventitious roots as part of their natural habit, and you may have seen these on the stems of succulents such as Aeonium, on the moth orchid, Phalaenopsis, and on corn. Some plants with a trailing or prostrate growth habit also produce adventitious roots where their stems are in contact with the ground. Over the course of their evolution, many plants have formed beneficial associations with soil microorganisms. The relationships are usually symbiotic, meaning they're mutually beneficial. The soil fungus or bacteria receives carbohydrates from the plant, and the microorganisms in turn enhance the root function of the plant, and they can do this in several ways. Mycorrhizal fungi might extend the surface area of the root system, helping the plant to take up water and nutrients more efficiently. Soil microorganisms might provide specific nutrients to a plant, or they might form a protective sheath around the plant roots that protects the plant against certain pathogens. Probably the best known beneficial root association is the one between members of the pea family and bacteria in the genus Rhizobium. The Rhizobium bacteria are able to fix atmospheric nitrogen and convert it to a form that's available to the plant. In return, the Rhizobium receive carbohydrates from the plant. A similar relationship exists between nitrogen-fixing bacteria in the genus Frankia and several plant genera, including our California native Ceanothus species, and you can see an example of Ceanothus in the photo on the right here. The benefits of root associations have been recognized by many manufacturers of potting mixes, and as a result, many potting mixes used commercially and by home gardeners now include beneficial microorganisms. The photo here is of a commercial product made by ProMix, which includes a biofungicide and a mycorrhizal organism. Many companies are very proprietorial about their potting mix recipes, and you may have to dig deeply in order to find out exactly what the beneficial microorganisms are. In this particular case, the biofungicide is a naturally occurring strain of the bacteria Bacillus pumilus, which ProMix claims enhances plant growth and combats harmful organisms such as Fusarium, Pythium, and Rhizoctonia. ProMix doesn't tell you what the mycorrhizal organism is, though. Any ingredient added to a potting mix adds to its cost. So before buying into manufacturers' claims, I strongly recommend you conduct trials with your crops to make sure the added expense is worth it. Additionally, potting mixes containing beneficials may not be appropriate if you're growing plants for restoration or revegetation projects, as you may be introducing bacteria or fungi that aren't native to that particular site. Let's finish by quickly summarizing the main points of this lecture. Roots have several purposes. They anchor a plant in the ground or substrate, and they take up water and nutrients. And some plants have modified roots that also act as storage organs. When a plant's grown from seed, its roots are described as being seminal roots. These roots form either a fibrous root system, where no single root dominates, or a taproot system, where the taproot is much larger than the secondary and tertiary roots. Some plants produce adventitious roots, which are roots formed anywhere on a plant other than the original crown. Some plants produce adventitious roots as part of their natural growth habit, or they may be produced as a result of some propagation methods. Root growth and structure is controlled by plant genetics, but it can also be modified by the growing environment. And finally, good propagators and growers recognize the importance of a healthy, well-developed root system and are able to manipulate the environment in order to produce a quality plant that has both a good shoot and a good root system. That's the end of this introduction to roots. Head back now to Canvas to continue with the module or go take a break.